Hello and welcome to the conversation here on New Central Television, the show where we bring you the latest updates on political happenings around the continent. I'm Benga Burrow.
And I am Rita Omodia, and today's edition promises to be very intriguing. We have lots of stories going on in the African continent. All right, now we're looking at issues on the conversation, but before that, we saw lots of stories going on in the African headlines. Of course, we know of the Facebook shutdown in Burkina Faso due to lots of insurgency going on in the country.
And a planned protest against insecurity in the country, and I believe the government did it as a preemptive effort to prevent people from gathering.
And if we go back to protests, remember we've been talking about Sudan and the protests going on. And so far, we can say that probably the willpower of the people is having its way because the military head there has appointed 15 ministers. But you know, Benga, that there was no...
I was going to say that, you know, the Sudanese protesters are so resolute. And I'm not sure, I'm waiting to hear feedback from the protest groups if they would accept that, because they're saying they don't even want a power sharing deal. They want all the powers to go to civilians.
And just to note, there was no prime minister, there was no interior minister, there was no defense minister. In all those 15 ministers, they were appointed by the military head. So now let's stick to issues of the conversation.
So today on the conversation, we'll begin in Central African Republic, where the country is to hold its first local elections in more than 3 decades. The National Elections Authority announced that the polling day has been set for September the 11th. The estimated $15 million cost of staging the vote will be borne mainly by the international donors, notably the European Union.
Now, recall that in December 2020, the CAR held a presidential election, as a result of which the National Constitutional Court confirmed the victory of President Faustin Archange Touadera with over 53% of the vote in the first round. The world's second poorest country, according to UN development benchmarks, has struggled for years with intra-community violence and political turmoil. It spiraled into bloodshed after its then president, Francois Bozize, was overthrown in 2013.
Now, joining us on the conversation today is Hoinati Remaji, a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies Regional Office for West Africa, the Sahel and Lake Chad. Thanks for joining us on the conversation, Hoinati.
Thank you.
Now, Hoinati, municipal elections haven't been held in the Central African Republic in 30 years. That's a long time, even though presidential elections were held in December of 2020. Why did it take so long, and why haven't municipal elections been held all this while?
Okay, I know, as we all know, I mean, this country has been under instability since very long, starting even since 2003. The country has been under massive rebellion and a lot of instabilities. You have just talked about the overthrowing of President Bozize with the Seleka, but after the Seleka, there was also another instability. And after President Samba Panza, Touadera have been elected. So I think because of this very instability that the country have been experiencing since long, there was no room, having local elections.
Okay, now, so, all right, so with these elections happening on September 11th, according to the electoral body, what do you think would be the importance of this election, and what exactly can you say? Would you say that we are far from over from political violence going on? That is why we can now fix elections for September 11th?
Yeah, I mean, it should also be recalled that for the past 3 decades, since 1988, there have been no local elections. This means that mayors have been designated by the president. It means then they have not been elected based on a program or in a project for the community. So I think that allowing Central African people to choose their own mayor for the first time in 30 years is very signifying because this symbolizes one more step toward the normalization of the socio-political situation in the country, despite the instability that is still there, mainly in the northern part of the country. So for me, it's a very important turning point for the country if those elections could be held peacefully.
And I also believe that it has a way of devoluting powers to the people and prevents the winner-takes-all system that you have in Bangui, the central government in Bangui. Now, elections by their nature have to be held in peaceful and in a peaceful environment. The latest agreement sponsored by the African Union and signed in February 2019 by the government and 14 armed groups raises hope of peace in Central African Republic. The violence has not stopped, however, and political tensions are again on the rise. I know September is still far from now, but is the current security situation in the Central African Republic conducive enough for elections to be held?
I mean, you put it very well. We know that most and all of the agreement, peace agreement in that country never worked. And from the beginning, we could know that a peace agreement with more than 10 different groups, political parties and rebel groups signing was something that from the beginning was not very feasible. So as we already saw with the presidential elections, even there have been no election in some parts of the country due to insecurity. So I think that security is here the main, if not the biggest challenge for those elections. How could the country be secure so that people in northern part of the country could access voting offices, etc., is here a big challenge. And seeing as this is not a central election, but rather a local election, I mean, a lot of effort should be done by the National Army, completed by the Russian that are here also, to secure most of the country so that people can, in the different locations, go to the polls and elect the people they want to govern them. So I think security and stability is here the main challenges that the country has ahead of those elections.
Okay, now, according to the electoral body, the estimated $15 million cost of conducting the elections will be borne mainly by international donors, and that is the European Union. How sustainable is this going forward?
Countries, most of the countries in that part of Africa, to mean Central Africa, even a country like Chad and other countries here, for long have been relying on the international donors to organize most of the elections. And in CAR, actually, they are expecting some $30 million from international donors. The European Union, but also France as a long-run partner. They also expect from Switzerland, Germany, but also the UN institutions. And for me, economy can be one of the challenges. But what we see is that most of the time when the relationships between the national, the country and the international milieus are safe, then they could access this money. The problem is just that actually, because of the Russian presence in the Central African Republic, there are some debates, if the Westerners are to participate or not. And so this also would be a point of discussion between the Central African Republic and the international partners. But the country actually, since the country is under conflict since a long time, I think that economically they cannot alone sustain those elections economically, and they can rather not pay even the half of the budget of these elections.
Nati, $30 million is a big amount of money to a country like the Central African Republic. Don't you think that money could have been channeled into food security, to more economically driven activities that could spur up the economy and allow the Central African Republic be independent of international donors?
I think
why is the international community so fixated on these local elections?
What we call democracy, international is first. Sometimes in those kind of countries turn to staging democracy rather than experiencing real democracy coming with the others. So staging democracy most of the time, it's done through elections. whatever the results of these elections, whatever the utility of those elections. So this is also what is happening. And for the international communities and most of the donors, having elections is kind of getting back to the normality, the institutional normality that they used to say. In principles, having local elections, in a normal situation, could also bring back development because it's based on program elaborated locally by people that are closer to the populations that can then act for development in those different states. But in a country that have been down because of conflict since so long, yeah, your question is right. And there are other things that are more important and that could be prioritized on elections. But, agendas are very different in the international community.
Well, the fears, just as Benga rightly said, that most African countries, for example, Mali, they have been talking about taking away former colonial powers, France. And of course, one of the reasons why they came in was because they called for the assistance. So don't you think these problems will arise? We're in between staging democracy and having practical democracy. So even if we do our democracy and it's staged, when international powers come, we'll still have a state democracy. So isn't it better we handle things by ourselves?
Oh, it's totally better handling things by ourselves. But I mean, if you want to handle things by yourself, you need also, to work out the means necessary to handle things by yourself.
True.
And I think if a country is able handling issues like elections or defending his territory, then you can dictate the way you want to go to all the partners. But when you are not able, then those people come in and you have to follow the rules.
Now, in the last presidential and National Assembly elections, the National Elections Authority, the body in charge of elections in the Central African Republic, put the turnout at a mere 37% of the 1.8 million registered voters. What do you think is responsible for the voter apathy? And do you see an improvement in voter turnout this time around? The caveat is we do understand that elections didn't hold in some parts of the country due to the high level of insecurity.
Yeah, as I said, mostly in the northern part of the country, we have this coalition of Patriots for Change, gathering some rebel groups like the UPC, but also the former President Bozize's party, Kwanakwa, have tried after the elections to overthrow the president. And when President Bozize's candidacy had been refused, he joined this coalition. And the aim was, since that time, to overthrow the president even before the elections. So this made it very difficult for people to access polling offices and to participate in the vote. And actually, the situation is still almost the same. The Russians, with the Russians' help, they could clean some of the spaces. But I can tell you that actually most of the remote places in northern Central African Republic are not peaceful. It means that elections there will be very disturbed.
Okay, so the president declared unilateral cessation of fighting against armed groups, saying he hoped it would lead to peaceful dialogue. What's the current situation in CAR? Has that a ceasefire been successful?
Yeah, I mean, this is an official declaration. As I said, some part of the northern part of the country have been actually secured with the help of the Russians, helping the Central African militaries. But at the same time, let us take it as an official declaration. But we know from the news and from the monitoring we are doing from the security there that there are still some parts of this country that are actually unsafe and that are not ready for elections.
Now, Hoinati, we've seen what the Russian presence in any countries, we've seen it in Mali, we're seeing it in the Central African Republic, does to international partners, especially from the West, Europeans and the Americans. They're never happy about a Russian presence in the country. Is the Russian presence in Central African Republic purely militaristic, or are there political points to be scored? Are we back to Cold War politics of the 90s?
No, I think we are not back to Cold War per se. But I mean, from a long time, the Westerners, I mean here, the USA, but also some European countries, they view very badly the presence of Russia in some zones that where they are also intervening. What is problematic with the presence of Russia in Central African Republic actually is that the group that is present in Central African Republic is a private group, is a private military group. So it's not a collaboration between two states, but it's rather a kind of contract with what people label mercenaries. And according to the international laws, this is, somehow disturbing. So this is the argument that Western people are actually using against the presence of Russia in Central Africa.
Yeah. Yes, sorry to butt in there. A lot of analysts and researchers have also said that this Russian mercenaries, the Wagner group, have close ties with the Kremlin. So don't you think they're state sanctioned in some sort of way?
I think that, it have been evidence that they are very close, and the people that are heading this Wagner group are very, very close to the Kremlin in Russia. And this is where all this is disturbing. How could a state base his bilateral relations by taking in a third actor being here, a very private actor? This is very problematic. And this is also why a lot of people think that behind Wagner, there is Russia per se, and beyond that, there are a lot of economical interests that are actually concerning the game.
All right. Okay, thank you so much, Oinata Remaji, for sharing your thoughts with us on the conversation, especially as we look forward to municipal elections in Central African Republic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And coming up on the conversation after the break, we will be looking at developments in Gambia as President Adama Barrow has been sworn in for his second term. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the conversation. Now, turning our attention to Gambia, President Adama Barrow has been sworn in for his second term at ceremonies near the capital, Banjul. Barrow's first election in 2016 put an end to more than 20 years of dictatorship in the West African nation under Yahya Jammeh.
The former property developer was re-elected in December, winning 53% of the vote. He was sworn in for second 5-year term at a ceremony attended by foreign dignitaries. The vote was seen as a test of democratic stability for the small country 5 years after a regional peacekeeping mission forced longtime ruler Yahya Jammeh out of the Gambia after he refused to concede defeat to Adama Barrow.
I'm feeling happy. I'm feeling happy because my president, who I vote for, has won already. Yeah, that's why I'm so happy. Everyone in the Gambia, they are all out for jubilating the president. We are all happy.
Adama Barrow is the good person to run the country because he's a peaceful man. He's so determined of his words, and we trusted him. So this is why we all vote for him, because we trusted him. And then we know he can do it. He's not going to fail us. They have no right to reject the results because the results are right. The IC chairman has declared the right results, so there's no way to be doubt the results. The results are right, they are clear. Everybody knows it's the fact. So there's no lie about the results.
Now, joining us now is Dr. Kwaku Danso, a conflict analyst, and Sana Kamara, journalist and media consultant in Banjul, the Gambia. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I'd like to start with Dr. Danso. In late November of 2021, the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission report was delivered to President Barrow. The report recommended the government prosecute a number of officials for human rights abuses and crimes allegedly committed during the Jammeh era. Till now, the names of the alleged perpetrators have not been made public. Do you think President Barrow has the political will to implement the report's recommendations? And Will Yahya Jammeh be extradited from Equatorial Guinea?
Thank you very much indeed. From what we have witnessed thus far, it doesn't seem like Mr. Burrow is committed to implementing the sections of the report relating to holding persons who have been cited as having committed human rights violations, nor is he likely to bring Mr. Yahya Jammeh to book, particularly if one considers the fact that just a few weeks prior to the elections in last December, Mr. Barrow's party, the NPP, had entered into some political alliance with Mr. Jammeh's party, the PCDR, that raised a lot of concerns relating to his commitment to implement the provisions of the report.
Okay, let's continue with Sana now. From where he stopped, he talked about the alliance that Barrow formed with Jammeh's old party, that is the Alliance for Patriotic Reorientation and Construction. What are your own thoughts on this alliance, and did this in any way facilitate him securing a second term?
Thank you. The alliance, personally, I would personally say that it would be treated by the president to go into alliance with a party that we fought for over 20 years to rescue from power in the Gambia. And I am not alone in this. A lot of right-thinking Gambians think that this is a very wrong move. It is morally wrong for the president to do this. I think he's also made a calculated move in his best interest, because the president only had a party 1 year before the elections. He was never a party leader. He came in as a candidate who was leading a coalition, or who was choosing to lead a coalition of 8 other political parties. And it was based on the understanding that he was only going to serve a transition of 3 years. Of course, history has shown us that that never happens in Africa. He refused to respect the 3 years, and he went to 5 years, and again refused to step down at the end of the 5 years. Rather, he went ahead to form his own political party to contest as an incumbent. So from all observations, the president wouldn't have the political muscle needed for him to go through this or to secure such a victory without making very deliberate moves that is going to ensure that he also enjoys full support and then put his incumbency on top of the others.
Now, staying with you, Sana, do you think a quid pro quo type of move deal was held? Because, I mean, it was a gamble for him to align with former President Jammeh's party, who the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up for. And we've seen the atrocities and also the corruption that took place under the Jammeh administration. Do you think this, by having a deal with his former party, would hinder his fight against corruption and trying to get justice?
Obviously, the president is already conflicted. On the one hand, he was going all out to secure a second term in office, which he succeeded in doing, even though the main opposition players are still querying his victory. But obviously, he's already secured a second term. But then, beyond the second term, there are other expectations that he has to also come to. One of them would be for him to move on corruption. Corruption not only in terms of financial or economic corruption, but also there have been some various human rights violations, which in other forms also constitute corruption. Now, that is one of the campaign promises that were being peddled around when he was going around and campaigning, that some figureheads within the former president's party were asking their supporters to throw their weight behind President Burrow, because he is the only one who can assure them of the return of the former president, as well as also protect them, or in other words, to shield those who are going to be adversely mentioned by the DRC from prosecution. Now, whether he's going to go ahead with this or not is something that we are all waiting to see. But I know that this is something that is not going to be taken lightly by the population and by our international partners who supported us from the beginning to make sure that this transition is run on programs and policies that everybody agreed on when we were trying to get Jammeh from power.
Okay, now, Dr. Danso, there are a lot of expectations for Adama Barrow, apart from getting justice for those who have been abused due to Yahya Jammeh's administration. Also, economic upturn was what people were looking for. And now a government commission identified some 281 properties as assets of the former president Yahya Jammeh. But so far, nothing has been said of how these assets are being handled. So how would you assess the level of transparency in Barrow's administration?
Well, thank you once again. I think to some extent, certain attempts have been made to, if you like, confiscate certain assets that were deemed to have been acquired illegally by the former president. But as to whether the regime or the presidency of Mr. Burrow is truly committed to taking over these assets and, taking them over from Mr. Jammeh remains a critical question that needs some answers, particularly as we mentioned earlier, given the initial moves that have been taken by the president. As we noted earlier, his decision to enter into alliance with the APRC party, obviously in order to tap into the support base of Mr. Jammeh. That raises a number of questions. And there are some indications that as part of that arrangement, there are moves to let Mr. Jammeh have some of the assets that are in question, and so on and so forth. So that raises a number of questions regarding the commitment of Mr. Adama Barrow to really ensure that there is accountability, particularly in relation to those assets that are deemed to have been acquired illegally.
I'd like to stay with you, Dr. Danso. We've recently seen ECOWAS under the chairmanship of His Excellency, the President of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, seen as a champion of democracy. They've clamped down hard against military coups. But we also talk about justice. On the other hand, you have a situation where Blaise Compaoré is wanted in Burkina Faso, and you have Yahya Jammeh in exile in Equatorial Guinea. ECOWAS hasn't talked about serving justice. Would this be considered meddling in the internal affairs of these countries, or and what message does it send when ECOWAS is silent on the delivery of justice around the subcontinent?
Well, I think the ECOWAS and other leaders within the region find themselves in a very complicated situation when you take into account the cases that you just highlighted. The fact of the matter being that if you have instances where coup d'etats have been staged, and of course, I am completely opposed to any removal of democratic regimes within the region. I think it is essential that we consolidate democracy in the region, because that is the only way through which we are able to assure long-term.
Sorry to interrupt you here, Dr. Danso, but when civilian governments perpetrate themselves in power, change the constitution, and give themselves third terms in office, isn't that a civilian coup?
Well, so that's the point I was actually coming to. If you take a look at some of the political developments that we have witnessed within the region lately, you would notice that the coup d'etats that have been staged are, military interventions that have received massive support on the part of the population, right? You have the population throwing their support behind the military leaders, and that places regional agencies or organizations like the ECOWAS in a very complicated situation. And therefore, what you want to see is a more proactive ECOWAS that intervenes when leaders seek to truncate the constitution in the first instance, in order to obviate the need to have to impose sanctions that are becoming particularly difficult to implement. So I think what we need to do is to intervene to ensure that leaders within the region, comply with constitutional terms, particularly the term relating to terms of office, and to desist from attempts to, extend their stay in power beyond constitutionally mandated period.
Now, talking about constitution, Kamara, we know that the government resolved to review the 1997 constitution and draft a new constitution to address the wishes of Gambian people and also strengthen democracy. Unfortunately, that process did not see the light of day. So can we say that Burrow is still under the shadows of Yahya Jammeh's administration?
Obviously. A great example will be these current elections that we just had last month. These elections were conducted under laws that Jammeh established as electoral laws in the Gambia throughout his reign in office. And the fact that Burrow could not wield his political muscle to make sure that that constitution, the new constitution, passed into through the parliament, and so that the country continues to be ruled with the 1997 constitution, which is one of the failures of this regime of the transition program that was promised to the people.
Okay, now still looking at Adama Barrow's second term now, at the inauguration, he promised to upturn the economy of the country and, of course, give and ensure broad-based development. Do you think Adama Barrow in his second term, because we know that the Gambia is still, unfortunately, one of the poorest countries in the world, do you think Adama Barrow will do something different in this second term and help upturn economic dividends in the country?
Personally, I'm not very hopeful, because one of the signs that is going to show what will be different in the second term is probably to change the cabinet that he has. But just yesterday, we saw a press release from the
Kamara?
With the experience of the first mandate, you coming on with the fresh mandate, the least that we will expect from you is probably to institute some changes to say, okay, maybe we can try to move on and learn from the lessons of the past, bring in new or fresh minds. But rather, you look at the decides to bring in anything new. The president was rushing through his candidature to stand for elections. We haven't seen any clear development plan that he is going to unveil. I mean, for now, we haven't seen that. Hopefully, in the coming weeks or in the coming months, he might come up with something like that. But so far, we haven't seen anything new or any prospect for anything different, or besides what he started to continue along those, or maybe trying to continue something that he has not been able to accomplish during this post mandate. For example, the issue of the draft constitution, which is still shelved, and it still cannot have a breakthrough because there are still some contentious issues that are not agreed upon by all the political players. But also, like it was earlier highlighted, the issue of the properties of the former president. 200 bank accounts and properties, both physical properties and financial properties, including companies in and outside the Gambia. And also the household properties in the Gambia were more than 100. And then that extends to also his political party that he was leading. But we've shown the president, because of political compromise, he had to release some of the assets belonging to the former president's party, so as a way of controlling or as a way of enjoying their support during the past presidential election. So there are a lot of question marks raised around his policies or the direction towards which he will be going in the past 5 years, until he comes forward and clearly explain to us, this is my development plan, this is the direction that I want to take the country towards. I personally am not very impressed with what I saw over the past 5 years, and I don't think much will change in the coming 5 years.
Dr. Danso, we just listened to Kamara, and that sigh, that disappointment.
No development plan.
Yeah, it's not just the Gambia, it echoes around the West Africa sub-region, with the exception of Ghana and a few other countries. So we've seen how this democratic experience has been in the last 2 decades, post-military regimes in West Africa. But we're having an ECOWAS type of democracy. You look at Togo, you look at Republic of Benin, you look at Togo, you look at Ivory Coast, and you look at Guinea, they've changed constitutions. Burkina Faso in the recent past in the toga of civilian wear. They've done all of this. And a lot of the citizens are not really enjoying the benefits of democracy. What can be done to ensure that governments are more accountable to the people and the principles of democracy are enshrined?
Well, I think the ECOWAS has specific international norms, democratic norms relating to ensuring that countries in the region abide by the democratic tenets that they themselves enshrine and confirm to rule their countries by. I think what the ECOWAS needs to do is to be more proactive, is to be more effective, particularly in terms of eliciting compliance to the rules that leaders within the region sign. Because until we are able to hold leaders accountable, citizens are going to get disenchanted, and that disappointment and disenchantment sometimes feed into the tendency of the military then to stage coup d'etats in the region and so on. So I think we need an ECOWAS that is more active and is able to hold their leaders or leaders within the region accountable, and not to wait until military interventions take place before then they step in to impose sanctions, which are becoming all the more difficult for them to enforce.
Now, aside from constitution, one thing that is a major characteristic of most African leaders is looting of a country's treasury. We saw how many assets were recovered from Yahya Jammeh's administration. What do you think can be done to curb this trend?
Well, I think there is the need for a much more viable civil society within the region. One of the effective mechanisms for ensuring accountability is civil society. And most of the civil society groupings within the region have lost their luster, have lost their activeness, and so on. And therefore, as a result, you have a situation where accountability within the region is becoming all the more difficult to enforce. And I think the role of civil society is one critical element that is missing in the equation. You have a lot of civil society that claim to be have responsible or have adopted or have responsibilities or that intend or that how shall I put it? Civil society groupings that, if you like, focus on issues of accountability, democracy, and so on and so forth. But in most instances, some of them have become bedfellows of ruling regimes and therefore are not able to hold government accountable as you would expect of them. And I think that is one critical element, as I noted earlier, that is missing in this whole equation.
Now, Sana, before we wrap things up, we know where Gambia was with Yahya Jammeh when he wasn't locking up opponents or looting the country's treasury. He was making false banana portions and claims to cure HIV and AIDS. Would you say Gambia has made a lot of democratic progress since Adama Barrow's re-elections? And what's the future of civil society and democracy in your country?
Definitely, there's been a lot of democratic gains over the past 5 years since President Jammeh left the Gambia. I credit the Gambian people for this, not just President Adama Barrow, because the people made sure that even the president, if he attempts to violate the constitution or usurp rights of the population, the civil society is on top of it and to ensure that accountability and democratic principles are respected. Obviously, the civil society has also been going to the courts to challenge certain actions, policies, or legislation that are being tried to enforce by the ruling government. So, in a sense, consolidating that democracy is a two-way thing. On the one side, it is the executive and the president acting in conformity with the laws of the Gambia and in respect of these principles guaranteed by the Constitution and other laws. On the other hand, it's also the civil society working very hard to ensure that these laws continue to be respected, and even at some point trying to push the boundaries of these laws in terms of ensuring that people's freedom are so much respected. And where they fail by way of advocacy, they will still go to court and for the court to make certain pronouncements that withhold the rights and rights guaranteed in the Constitution. Yeah, that is one side. Definitely, that is one positive thing that we can as a positive for Adama Barrow.
Thank you very much, Sana. Gentlemen, this is where we drop the anchor on today's conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you both. I do appreciate your insights on the subject.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
And that's it on the conversation for today. We've been talking to Dr. Kwaku Danso, a conflict analyst, and Sana Kamara, a journalist and a media entrepreneur in the Gambia.
And there have been a lot of expectations for the second tenure of Adama Barrow after the dictatorship of about 20 years, more than 20 years, of Yahya Jammeh. Let's see how far Adama Barrow will go in this second tenure.
And Rita, a lot to look forward to with regards to politics in Africa. In the next few days, we'll be monitoring the situation in Sudan, Ethiopia, and also Mali, developing situations there.
We'll see how the willpower of the people will come to play in these particular situations. That's where we'll draw it on today's edition of The Conversation. I am Rita Mordia. Do join us again at 5 p.m. on Monday as we bring in new political stories on The Conversation.
And I'm Benga Burrow. Bye-bye.